In this episode of the Real Sales Manager podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Stephen Fricker, the Chief Revenue Officer at Connect, a global systems integrator and digital transformation experts. We talk about sales management in general, the challenges of transitioning from an individual contributor role, and the importance of setting really high standards. Stephen was recommended to the podcast by his former colleague Mark Petty, who described him as knowledgeable, articulate, and a very successful sales leader with a passion and great expertise in helping salespeople to succeed. And so we spent a lot of time discussing how he very effectively goes about coaching people. Stephen brings a wealth of great experience to our discussions, having held senior sales leadership positions at Sabio, at Logicalis, and at Dimension Data, focusing mostly on new client acquisition. Enjoy. So, Stephen, thanks ever so much for coming on the podcast. Really good to see you. Can we just start with a standard question? Could you just tell us a little bit about how you got into sales management in the first place, and maybe why you moved into sales
Wow.
management?
I'm sure you've had quite a few different answers to this question, but thank you, Steve. Like many people who got into the world of sales, I didn't actually have some sort of grand strategic plan when I was at university that sales was my dream. And I think actually when I told my mother I was going to be a salesperson, she cried. So it wasn't necessarily the career path I planned for myself. She always dreamed that I'd be a lawyer. But I did get into sales through a graduate recruitment agency and discovered that I loved it, and was fortunate enough to not only enjoy it but was pretty good at it. And I've been doing it for a while. It was actually at a company called Dimension Data that I was at, where I was doing as a senior salesperson doing some mentoring for some of the younger people in the team. And I found that I really got a buzz out of that, and kind of just working with them and seeing them develop actually gave me a sort of a huge joy in my career. And as part of what I did as an individual contributor, I had to build virtual teams. So, I was working every day with people from project management or the technical teams, engineering, pre-sales, and leading those teams in a virtual manner without having them as reports. And again, I found that I was pretty good at that, and I really enjoyed it. So I was speaking to a mentor of mine and a manager and sort of describing that. And he said, well, perhaps, sales management is something you should try. And I was fortunate enough to, having been there for a while, proven my value. I was very fortunate to have some great bosses, really good mentors who actually put their faith in me and gave me the opportunity. So it started with my first year as kind of a leadership role, which involved doing a bit of the day job and management almost as on the side. That went well and launched straight into full-on sales leadership after that.
Right. Oh, okay. Interesting. Your story about your mother crying and going into sales. That's exactly what happened to me. It was,
Really?
I was a huge disappointment. Yeah.
I think she still would like to see me in a suit in a courtroom somewhere. Obviously, defending someone else, not myself, obviously.
Yes, yeah. And interesting you say you spent a year as most people call it a team leader type role, kind of player manager.
Exactly that.
How did you find that? Because I get mixed reports.
Very difficult, and I'm not a fan of it. Even though in some organizations we've kind of implemented that due to lack of, availability of, full management roles. But in my opinion, it's almost always less optimal than a full leadership role. And the reason being is sales individual contribution is a really difficult job. It's very demanding and requires a lot of you, both from your time, but also, I think, emotionally. And I think leading people is also a role that requires, a lot of you. And if you split yourself between those two things, I think you're probably going to do each one, less well than if you did it individually. So I do believe that a full-on leadership role should be that rather than player manager.
Yeah, I said the results are mixed. Overwhelmingly, people would support you on that, Stephen. That it is so, and it's an emotional thing. It's not you have the skills and you may have the time, but that focus, that emotion.
Yeah, I'd even add to that, Steve, which is in the worst case, which I have seen at multiple organizations, you end up with a situation where the lead sales manager or team leader is put in a effectively invidious position where they have to kind of make a judgment call between supporting themselves and their team. Especially
Yeah.
if, for example, it was a new business team, there's a moral dilemma of I've been given a lead. Well, as a leader, should I distribute that to one of my guys or girls? Or should I take it myself to do my personal quota? And I think it's kind of unfair for an organization to put individuals in those situations. Yeah, so I'm not a fan.
Yeah. No, okay. Yeah, as you say, really, really difficult. Okay, so you kind of grew into it. There were some natural talents came out. You're enjoying it. When you look back now and you think about, new sales managers or people aspiring to be new sales managers, what do you think are the kind of the key traits or attributes that people should look for in themselves, or you would look for if you're appointing managers?
The line wasn't perfect there, Steve, but I said, what were the traits? Was the question, what are the
Yes.
traits? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, look, it's an interesting one. And before I answer the question, kind of what are the traits? First thing I would say is it's not necessary to have a fulfilling career and to succeed, in your chosen path to always go up a management path. Luckily I work in the world of technology, and there are many people, whether they're salespeople, engineers, or project managers, who are world class and do really well without having a management function. So I think
Yeah.
it's a misnomer that a lot of young salespeople, when I interview them, and I ask them, what's your aspiration? I think they all think the right answer is to be the sales director. I won your job, which is great. And I'm sure many of them will do and perhaps do better than I can one day. But I think you shouldn't always assume that that is the natural path of progression in sales.
Yeah.
So that would be my first thing. I've spoken to many sort of people that I've worked with and mentored over the years who thought that's what they wanted, but actually on reflection realized it wasn't what they wanted, and they were just following it because they thought it's something they should do. So that'd be my first point. But if you are somebody that is contemplating a move into sales management, I think there is something that might be rare in some people, which is selflessness. You have to be willing and enjoy seeing other people succeed around you. And in sales, we're a broad church. We've got all kinds of people. And for some people, that suits their personality really well. Some, really outstanding individual contributors, it's just not the way they're wired. So I think, enjoying seeing something, bigger than yourself succeed is really important. I think you have to be more long-termist than short-termist in your outlook on life. And by that, I mean, again, I'm casting generalizations here, but in general, salespeople are quite money motivated. And if you're a top performer in your sales team, most companies that I know, you will earn more than your manager.
Sure.
And quite rightly so. It's
Yeah.
most commission plans are structured so that top salespeople earn more than their managers. Again, you have to be aware of that. And if you are the top performer in that team, make an acceptance that certainly in the short to medium term of your career, your earnings won't increase, but it will open new doors and different avenues to you as you go on. So I think you need to have both of those things in mind.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. I mean, that first point of yours, I always try and avoid the word promotion into sales management. It's a
Demotion and pay cut. Is that what you're trying to say, Steve?
Okay. Well, as you said, you may not actually take home as much in the first year
Sure.
or two, for sure. But it's a different role rather
It's
than
just a footpath.
yes, yeah. Okay, and that whole selflessness thing. So when you moved in, I mean, as a player coach we've discussed, that is a very difficult position. Once you got into your first full sales management role, what were the main challenges that you saw over the first 6, 12 months, whatever it was?
So you tend to get put into that role in one of two different formats. Either you become promoted into a team, often where people knew you as a peer, and you have that challenge, or you get the rare opportunity, which is the opportunity that I was given, was more or less to build your team. So in my first sales director's role, I was lucky enough to build my team. Most of the people I built it with were internal recruits and a few were external. But I think that made my life a little bit easier. I think it can be very difficult if you transition as one of a group of peers and suddenly you're their manager. I think that can be hard for some people. So I was very fortunate that was the format that it took for me.
Okay, but that presumably, there's lots of other challenges with that. You have to find people. You have to take
Recruiting was
risks.
difficult, and I certainly made some mistakes in the early days. I think as a salesperson, I was quite an emotionally led salesperson, so
Yeah.
my sales sort of techniques were very much around understanding and getting to know individuals within the client base and building those personal relationships out. And I approached managing a team in very much the same way. So I had some great successes because we built really good camaraderie and a good team ethos. But also, I remember one of my sort of coaches and mentors at the time saying to me, he said, "Look, Fricker, you're not one of the lads anymore." And that was a difficult transition because, I was always part of the team, a gregarious character, but actually you can be with the team, but you're not part of the team in the same way because at some point you might have to have a difficult conversation with those people. So actually, I would say for me personally, that transition from sort of being one of the boys to being a grown up and having a degree of separation took me a while to get my head around.
Yeah, I find that a lot, and even if you're not going to treat other people any differently, they're going to treat you differently, as because you're the manager and you have some power over them. They will just treat you in slightly different ways, which is very difficult, isn't it?
I also think it's respectful to have a degree of separation because it's important that a team, they need space to be able to discuss what's going on, how they feel about the organization, their targets, their comp plan, and all the things that concern quota bearers the world over. They need that space to be able to share that, without their manager kind of being part of all those conversations. So I think it's respectful to a great bit of distance too.
Yes. Okay. But as you say, particularly for a new manager, that's an emotional hurdle
Mm.
to get over. Okay. So you had the luxury of building your own team. You had some internal people, trying to transfer in. You had to hire. Did you, to what extent do you plan these kind of things? Or, as an individual contributor, often, you are dealt a hand of cards. You're given some accounts or some leads or whatever, and you play the best hand. As a manager, those cards are different. You've got different people. You don't know exactly how they're going to work out. To what extent do you plan things, Stephen, or is it just responding to opportunities?
Well, I'd love to give you some sort of like NBA style answer about, strategy, but the truth is that couldn't have been further from the truth. So
Yeah.
in the beginning, I was very reactive. It was all new to me. And, I mentioned earlier, if you're looking for somebody to be a good leader, as opposed to an individual contributor, one of the factors I would say is your outlook and time horizons need to be a bit different. You do need to be a longer term thinker. And actually, I've noticed as my career has gone further, one of the differences stepping from sales director to chief revenue officer is exactly that. A chief revenue officer needs to be looking further out than anybody else in an organization because I need to be planning for 18 months and 3 years. An individual contributor, they should have a view to the future, but they need to deliver what they need to deliver this month. And so the answer is, in the truth, in the beginning, it was very reactive, Steve. It was firefighting. It was making a mistake of thinking that because I was a good salesperson, that would automatically make me a good manager. And then it was also, again, in the early days, getting overly involved in individual deals. So rather than coaching, I did a lot of doing. So in the early years, definitely, a lot of doing rather than leading, which I know you and I have spoken about before in the past. So I think, I'd be brutally honest and say in the early days, I muddled my way through it and we achieved a modicum of success. I probably achieved a lot of success, but I think a lot of that was down to right place, right time, hard work, building up, and a really good team around me. But it definitely wasn't due to fantastic strategy and planning in the beginning.
Okay, but yes, I think the reality is that's true for the vast majority of. I mean, you're new to the role. You don't really understand which levers to pull or which levers you can just let alone. So it's an experience, and sometimes I see new sales managers with very high expectations, and actually it's a journey before they get where they want to be, if you ever get there.
And actually, I've seen some really talented individuals step their foot into the arena of sales management and realize that actually they didn't enjoy it as much or wanted to do it and go back to being really successful salespeople as well. I've seen that transition happen more than once, and there's no shame in that.
I know. I think it's very healthy. It sounds though, for me, first line sales management, when I did it, I really enjoy every job I do, but I really look back on that first line sales management role as probably the happiest, because you're close enough to the action that you know your people, you know their families, you know your customers, and yet you can still kind of paint on a bigger canvas. But if you don't enjoy it, it's an awful job. It's you're in the salary.
I think it's one of the most fun jobs that can be done. But I also think it's one of the most misunderstood roles in an organization. I saw a trend a few years ago, which I think is reversing a bit now, but I saw a trend where people started to think that first line of sales management was almost an overhead rather than a value add. And I couldn't disagree more. I think that first line sales managers are some of the most valuable people in any company, because they are as intimate as anybody with the clients and know the customers and know the marketplace, but they're also right on the coalface with the salespeople. They are touch point between the boardroom and what's happening, out in the field. And successful sales managers do drive the top and bottom line of every company, and poor sales management can, cause all kinds of issues. So I really do think it's a misunderstood profession.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree with that. Can we just change tack slightly?
Sure.
It was Mark Petty who recommended that you come on the podcast.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. And he specifically mentioned you apparently have this really strong ability to develop people or help people to develop themselves. Why do you think he mentioned that?
Why did he mention that? I think.
So you've worked with Mark, as you know.
Yes, no, I have. And look, I genuinely enjoy mentoring and working with people and developing them. And I think I said it earlier, but when I first started sales leadership, that was, of all the things I enjoyed, that was the thing that I got the most thrill out of. Seeing somebody fulfill their own potential and do really well, I always enjoyed. And I never felt that my sort of my joy was to sort of be the person to take the credit, but my joy was always to see them, kind of flourish. And interestingly enough, I still work with and have relationships with. I mean, that original team I first built at Dimension Data, I'm in touch with every single one of them, every single one. And in fact, two of them still work for me today in different guises, many companies 16 years later. So, it's definitely been a journey. So I've just always really enjoyed that, Steve. It's been something that I've gained, great deal of pleasure from in my career.
Yeah. And do you tend to work, with individuals, or do you see it as a kind of a team effort? So do you put in team development activities, or is it more the one-on-one that you think is more effective?
I think they're both important, but they're different. So I think when it comes to teams or larger groups of individuals, I think it's essential that you have standards of behavior, standards of cadence, standards of process, standards of tools, standards of professionalism. So for example, we agree as a team or as a company or as a group that this is what professional means: turning up on time, having forecasts done appropriately in the right way, meeting etiquette, appropriate use of CRM, a lot of the stuff that not everybody enjoys in sales, but those are things that are universal. So you have to set standards, and I think they have to be universal. It's very tempting, especially you're early in your leadership career, to kind of make allowances. If you've got like really strong performers with strong characters, to make allowances and not make them adhere to the process. And I think we've all seen that in our careers, but you can't, that doesn't work. I think eventually, if you have one rule for one and another rule for everyone else, eventually over time it creates unhappiness across the board and probably will impact
Yeah.
performance. So when it comes to standards, for me, they're universal.
Yeah.
But when it comes to coaching, it's individual.
Right.
I'm gonna. He probably should have watched this interview, so I'm not. I'm not going to name him, but he'll definitely see this interview, and I'll put it out there. Definitely one of the best bosses I ever had. So probably about 5 of you are now watching this, saying that's me. His quotes to me when I first became a leader was, "There's nothing more unequal than the equal treatment of unequals."
Yeah. Yeah.
Which sounds like a tongue twister, but basically, not everyone can be managed the same way.
Yeah.
And we all have different drivers, different motivators. We're at different stages of our life. Some of us operate from, uh, I've seen fantastic salespeople who operate from a constant state of fear. I've seen fantastic salespeople who don't seem to know what the word fear means. And if you try to motivate them in the same way, you'll get different results. So you do have to make coaching individual.
Right. Okay. The Americans talk about different strokes for different folks.
There you go.
Yeah. It's yeah. Okay. That's it. Can I just go back to the setting standards? Because again, totally agree. Particularly as a new sales manager, and maybe you are junior, you'll have people in the team who are more experienced than you. How do you go about? I mean, you said the team agree these things. Is it total democracy? Do you sit around and kind of chew the fat and think, what do we mean by professional? Or do you dictate it? Or what? How does it actually come about?
Again, I think it does depend on how long you've been leading as to how comfortable you can be. Because how I would approach that today versus how I tried to approach that in the beginning of my career are very different things. I think my advice for a young sales leader watching this would be start with your boss. Like, what are the standards and expectations that they have of you and your department? Because that's where you're going to get your high level, your macro. What are you going to achieve? And there'll be certain things that that come directly from there that you can create as part of the way of doing things with your team. So I think that's the right place to start. And the obvious, the things will be self-evident. It's about quality of forecasting. Agree what does good look like. And that will be different for different industries and different organizations. But once you say this is what our professional role is, set that as a standard so that everybody understands it. I would start with the little things. So cadence is really important. Professionalism, meeting etiquette, really simple, small things, but they do drive behavior. If you've got a team where, the top sales guy doesn't feel like he needs to turn up to the forecast calls to stay ahead of target, again, it's a very easy thing to let slip. But over time, it will, it will come apart. And so I think, start with the small things. In terms of behavior, if you're a new manager, set out the standards there. Look to your leadership and ask what are their expectations. And I think don't come up with too many things. It's very easy inadvertently to become a micromanager, which actually is not good for the people below you and it's terrible for yourself. So I think start with a few standards, not too many, and start from there.
Okay. I think that's excellent advice. Can I just go back, though, to say, you said start with your boss. Okay. So I'm a great believer that as a first-line manager, you do have to manage upwards a little bit. And sometimes people take that the wrong way. Because, where we add value is in coaching our people, getting the right people in the right place, all that good stuff. But in my experience, unless you have a good relationship that you can set the right expectations, you're going to have extreme difficulties. What's your view on all that? Because we don't want to become political animals, but for me, there is a certain amount of managing upwards.
Well, so Steve, I'm sure Mark Petty warned you about a crude way of talking, but nobody likes a brown noser. Is probably what I'm saying. And so I think you have to strike that balance. What are the company's goals? What are the missions? What are your boss's objectives or the company objectives? And how do you relate them down? That's table stakes. But I would also, my expectations is, I would hope that a new sales leader who's been promoted got promoted because they were an effective salesperson. Every effective salesperson knows that stakeholder management is critical, and probably they're already good at it. So I think, again, what you should do if you're new to the role, think about the leadership in your organization, the same way we think about the leadership in a prospect or a customer. I have to engage them. I have to understand their objectives. I have to align with them. You might not always become best friends with them. You might not always, go and play a round of golf with each other or have a lot in common personally, but you have to sell to them, just like you have to sell to your team. You're constantly communicating. So I think it's just table stakes. Think about it like an account, and you can't go too wrong. Where I've seen it go wrong is people forget that and then start trying to engage in politics. Whereas if you were selling to a customer and trying to play their internal politics, you'd probably come a cropper there. So why would you think it would be a good thing to do internally?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think a lot of new sales managers can really relate to that. If we go back to coaching people, yeah, as you said, it's very individual. Do you use any particular tools or methodologies for coaching, or how does it work for you?
Loads, Steve, loads.
Okay. Okay. What are your
Um,
favorites?
I've got, yeah, I'll give you quite a few, really. So I
Yeah.
think we're all guilty. The things that we do early on in our career stick with us. So
Yeah.
I've done lots of sales training, and I can honestly say that none of it's been bad, and I've learned from every single one of them. But early in my career, I did spin selling and I
Yeah.
did target account selling. So those have stuck with me,
Yeah.
and I still use them to this day. We don't follow any particular methodology, religiously, because I'm going to nick another quote from a former colleague who might watch just now. But I'd say it's a seat belt, not a straitjacket. I think the danger is that, if you read the literature of any sort of sales methodology, like The Challenge Yourself, great book, great thought-provoking piece of literature, changed, I think, our industry in many ways. And it turns the sort of received knowledge on its head. But again, just because it was a really good book doesn't mean it's appropriate for all situations in all ways.
Sure.
So I think it's really important to, always be learning. I like
Yeah.
Spin and Taz because, they were early in my career, but they're not Bibles. Yeah. They're pockets of information that you can use and apply to your own organization, because every organization is different. Every sales cycle is
Yeah.
different. So those are two from my early careers. Lots of books. I've actually gifted lots of books to my salespeople over the years. So
Okay.
there's Tough on Negotiation, Getting to Yes,
Oh
which
yeah.
is kind of the classic
Yeah. Winning in a
negotiation
hurry.
book.
Yeah.
And then after that, I read only a couple of years ago, a gentleman called Chris Voss wrote a book called Never Split the Difference. Really good negotiating work.
Yeah.
He's an ex-hostage negotiator,
Yes.
professional hostage
Yeah.
negotiator. So he's got a really good take on how to negotiate. So those are two books I've gifted.
Yeah.
What else? Oh yeah, prospecting as well. So and I think this goes back to, well, what has changed?
Yeah.
When I started, training was in a classroom with loads of handouts and photocopying sheets, and it took sort of 4 days out,
Yeah.
and that was just the way training was delivered.
Yeah.
We've got so much access to information now. Even this podcast is a great example.
Yeah.
So I think that the ability to go and consume bite-sized bits of information didn't exist when I started, but we're
Yeah.
spoiled for it now. So also podcasting is great. I'm sure this podcast will reach far and wide and, hopefully inspire young managers. But
We hope
also
so.
I recommend Jeff Blunt, the guy who wrote Fanatical Prospecting. He's
Yeah.
got a podcast called Sales Gravy. Highly recommend that
Okay.
one.
Yeah.
And also my friend Gary Gamp, he has a podcast called
Yeah.
The Company Doctor,
Yes.
which I also thoroughly recommend. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of information out there. I think my top advice is, rather than saying it's methodology A, B, or C, it would be, to be successful, be a lifelong learner
Yeah.
and continually keep looking for new information.
Yes.
Would be my sort of headline in terms of texts or books.
Right. I mean, a lot of people now encapsulate that in the phrase of growth mindset, that you're constantly looking to improve, change, adapt, get better.
Yeah, I'd go with that.
Yeah. And all these things are tools. Spin has great tools, but it's just a tool, and use the
It's just a
appropriate
tool. You need the right tool for the job.
Yeah. So those are tools to help us with the business of selling. In terms of your actual coaching, is coaching telling people to go read this book? or is it showing them how to do it? Or
Yeah, of course. Okay, so it does depend. It's very contextual, but at a high level, what are the key things, as sales leaders we need to coach on? So obviously we're talking about sales skills, which is essential. But if you think, especially for a new joiner, sometimes we can focus on sort of what's your sales strategy without thinking what are the broader context of sales skills that we need to equip you with. So first
okay,
one is how do you navigate your own organization? Um,
perfect.
Many companies are really bad at onboarding.
Yeah,
So navigating your own organization, how do you get things through your processes and helping somebody navigate internally is really important. I
right.
think helping your people understand your products and services. Again, I've seen it time and time again where somebody comes on board and they say, look, off you go, here's a target, fill your boots, but they haven't been
Yeah,
enabled on what the solutions and services really are, and what are the value
yeah,
to their potential clients as well. So I think there's sort of the prospecting of what are our skill, what are our products, how do we articulate them? I think
yeah.
that's really
Brilliant. Okay.
important. The other thing as well, I think, especially for a younger person, is helping them to understand their clients as well, because selling isn't just a communication stream. We all know two ears, one mouth,
Yeah, yeah,
but actually understanding what are the things that are happening. So if your clients, if you're a sales organization, for example, you're verticalized, helping them to find information sources about what are the key trends in the verticals they're selling to so that they can
yes,
be credible. And I think you need those components in place before you go down the route of just saying, here's some new techniques for negotiation. I think you can
right.
do it the wrong way around. So you start with the fundamentals
Yeah, yeah,
of, how to get things done, what's going on in the target market, what are your solutions and propositions, how do your customers think? And then we apply sales skills on top of those to make you effective. So I
yeah,
think those are the key areas. In terms of like how you would do it, I think the first thing you need to do when coaching a salesperson or anyone, but in particular in sales, is let's start with what's that cold hard facts, what's reality. So let's look at performance. And the reason you look at performance is because it's objective and it's measurable.
yeah,
So if you've got a salesperson who's absolutely flying and exceeding all of their targets, that's a wonderful coaching opportunity because you've got someone who's performing at a high level, and now it's your role as a coach to help them get that little bit extra.
yeah.
They're probably not going to, if somebody's already overachieving their target, you're probably not going to double where they are today, but wouldn't it be great to get them that little bit further? And
Absolutely.
I think with somebody who's really achieving, you should be very reflective and ask them, well, where do you think you can improve and go back to them. Um, if you start at the other end of the scale, either with someone who's new or very junior or not succeeding, we look at the objective metrics, as in where's your number and what's your pipeline. And if that's not good enough, 99 times out of 100, I'll start again with objective rather than subjective training, which is
Yeah.
what is your activity? And
Okay.
I know that sounds draconian and old school, and may turn off some of your viewers, but I think, again, I like to have something at the beginning that is objective,
Yeah.
because we can measure activity, for example. It's very difficult to measure how good your presentation skills are. So we start with
Right.
the objective,
Yeah.
and I think it's really simple. I've seen it. I don't know why, but I've noticed a trend in recent years that activity levels don't seem to be quite as high. If I remember early in my career, how many face-to-face meetings I did, it was a lot more than seems to be the average today.
Yeah.
Now working from home has certainly changed that, but just, I think there are certain points where customer FaceTime, whether it's on a video like this or in person, even better, is critical to moving an opportunity
Okay.
forward and qualifying it. So we start with the objective, are we doing enough activity? Is it the right
Yeah.
sort? And we measure that. Um, Usually it's not enough. If something's not achieving, it's usually not always, but it's usually
Yeah.
not enough. So we work on fixing that. If they are doing the right amount of activity and they're not succeeding, then we go to the next stage, which is okay, we're doing the right activity. Then let's look at, is it the right type of activity? What are the behaviors within those activities?
Yeah.
And we start very simple at meeting preparation. Are we preparing appropriately? Do we doing
Yeah.
the right level of research? Do we understand what our objective is before every meeting? And kind of, all the different components of
Right.
sales skills that we would all know,
Yeah.
we'll break them down and look at them individually. Because different individuals will have challenges at different stages in the sales cycle. You know, I've worked with people who are phenomenal negotiators. So once they get to that stage in the deal, they're really powerful, but they really suck at prospecting.
Right.
And they find that really difficult. I've had salespeople that are fantastic at opening the door, but once they get there, their forecast always moves to the right. Consistently, every quarter there's deal out the next quarter. So
Yeah.
we then will look at something different and talk about how we can help them negotiate. Wow.
Right. But the way you talk about it, Stephen, it sounds as though you're asking them questions all the time. Is it the right level of activity? Have you tried this? Rather than telling them, which I think we certainly need to be prepared to do as managers on occasions, but mostly it's about helping them to get to the right ends of themselves. Is that?
That's very much the case. And even going back to something I said earlier about setting out standards, something I sort of stumbled upon earlier in my sales leadership career was like people are much more likely to adhere to a standard if they set it themselves. So one of the things that, I probably may not recommend it for a first time manager because I think, you need your life simpler. But when you've got a bit of experience, when it comes to setting out standards, you can agree them with your team. What does good look like? And I think if they set it out themselves, it's far more liberating and they're much more likely to adhere to them because it's their own standard. So I think getting as a team or an individual to agree what good looks like is really key.
Yeah, that's interesting. And interesting, you say you probably need a bit more experience. And I guess maybe confidence yourself. I was talking to one sales manager recently who said in something like this, they would sometimes just leave the room if it was a team meeting and say, look, I'm coming back in 20 minutes. You tell me what professionalism means to you when I come back. That needs a lot of confidence.
It does. And you're really wrong.
It can
go wrong.
Yeah. So you need to know the team and the situation and the timing and everything. Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, so it's in terms of developing people, coaching people, anything else you found to be really, really useful?
I think making it individual, as I said before, it's coaching a salesperson is a bit like coaching an athlete. I'm a rugby fan myself. And if you look at rugby players, they all have a set objective, right? We want to win the game.
Yeah.
But how you're going to excel in your individual role, if you're a tie head prop, or you're one of those girls in the back, it's going to be very different. And as an individual, it might be your fitness that needs working on, or it could be your awareness, or it could be your handling skills. So you've got to be very careful not to kind of go with a one size fits all. I think that goes back to one of my earlier points, which is for sales management, I think there's an optimum size. I don't know exactly what that number is, but I think we all recognize it when a sales team's too big. And when a sales team gets too big, a manager becomes an administrator. Whereas when a sales team is small enough, they can add value in the sales cycle, but most importantly, add value to the individuals. So I think a key thing, if anybody gets to sort of that second line of sales leadership where you're managing managers, I think it's really important that you coach your management team, but you create the space for them to be coaches themselves. Otherwise, you're basically hiring some very expensive forecasting people.
Yeah, and I guess we've both seen many instances where that occurs. And it's not fair to people, and it's just not effective. Yeah, it's interesting what that optimal number is. But I guess it will differ depending on the maturity, the markets, your proposition.
Of course, it depends on the market, which is why I didn't want to say there's a number, right? But, if you're managing a team of people working on 3-year sales cycles, doing one deal every 3 years worth £100 million, it will be quite different if you're managing a team of people selling contracts over the phone, right? There will be a difference. But, I would say you're going to get a better ROI out of a manager if they've got a smaller team and the ability to coach.
Right. Yeah. Particularly a new manager. Because we all have to learn the trade, as it were. Okay. What I do is, and this is fascinating. We could go on all day because I'm enjoying it and learning a lot as well. But just to bring this section to a close, if you were, if you had to give 3 pieces of advice to a new sales manager, somebody straight into the role, what would your three biggest pearls of wisdom be?
My goodness, I hadn't thought about that one. Okay, the first thing will be get a coach.
Okay.
Because as a sales manager, you are a coach. And we are really guilty as an industry, as a sales industry, of just taking somebody who's a good doer and expecting them to be a good leader. So the very first thing, I haven't thought about 2 and 3 yet, so I'm talking and buying myself time. But definitely get a coach. I think, perhaps it was somebody who's managed you before, but if not, again, if you're in the tech industry, you're probably lucky enough to be exposed to partners, vendors, resellers, systems integrators. You're probably going to have contact with someone who's a leader who's not in your management team, or maybe not even in your company. And I think you'd be surprised if you approach it in the right way. If you approach somebody and said, look, in exchange for me buying you lunch once a month, could I, get, or once a quarter, could I get some coaching and mentoring from you? I think that's really, really important, because we don't just automatically know how to do it. I think that's the first
I'm
point.
very biased. Real Sales Manager offers coaching as part of that. But whether you take on a professional coach, absolutely, we all need coaches. I'd extend it for new sales managers to look at the people around you and reach out to everybody to get help. You've all of a sudden got peers in pre-sales, in service support. Your boss is probably a bit stressed, but is there to help you as well. Okay, get a coach. Obviously,
coach. So number two, I think let's just set some standards, right? So because especially if you're new, you might be in a situation where there's one of the sales guys is actually more senior than you, he's been around a bit longer than you, a bit long in the tooth, and so I'm gonna run rings around this young chap or lady. So I think it's really important to set some standards early and stick to them. And look, it might be difficult. You might get into a situation where, and this is really difficult to deal with, especially if it's early in your career. But if you come across somebody who just won't get on the bus, then maybe your role as a coach is to help them find a role somewhere else. And that's never easy, especially early on. But I think it'll be worth it in the long run for your organization and maybe for that individual too. So set your standards out, get a coach, set your standards. And I think the third thing is, remember that your job is to coach, not to do. And I could have done with that advice when I started, which is I think almost universally, every time I've seen first manager, promoted salesperson, they always try and do the deals. And that's not what you're here for. If that's what you love and your thrill is just the thrill of the chase and doing the deal, you probably made a bad career choice. Your job is to help other people to do the best that they can do. Otherwise, you don't scale as a leader. You're just popping in and trying to be the hero with a cape, rescuing every deal at the end of a quarter. That's not sustainable. And unfortunately, some boards think that is what sales management is, and that's a really bad misnomer. It's really important that you get behind your people and coach them. It's not your job to do their deals.
Absolutely. And I mean, I fell into that trap a little bit, certainly in the first few months, because you're trying to earn your spurs and get respect and credibility. But it is not the job, as you say.
And this one should be obvious. So just as a fourth final tip, never ever take credit for somebody else's hard work. Because that is the fastest way for everyone else to think you're a expletive bleep, right? You want to show value to your team, never claim. In fact, if anything, you should be more humble. And even if you have done the value, let your team get the limelight, because I think that's the good role of a coach.
And in some ways, I would say that comes back to what you said right the stars around being selfless. But you need to get a kick from seeing them up on the stage, not yourself, because that's what it's all about. Okay, and I'll just come back to that 1 and 2. That's setting the standards. That is so important, but so difficult. And maybe I'm just thinking, it takes a lot of guts, particularly if you've got somebody where, they need to be on a different bus. And that's where a coach can help you as well, not just with the skills, but in, helping you to think through and have that confidence. Excellent. Okay, Steve, I've got a bonus question I'm going to ask you in a minute, but for now, and anything else you'd like to say at this stage, and then
other than, thank you for the opportunity, and, really looking forward to watching the podcast, and I hope it's very successful, Steve.
Well, thank you. I'm sure it will be, because there's some great advice. Stephen, thanks ever so much for that.
Thank you.
Bonus question.
So, Stephen, as a bonus, I ask all my guests just to share with us, what was the biggest mistake you've made as a sales manager, and maybe what did you learn from it? And then also, what was your biggest triumph, and what did you learn from that?
Okay. Gosh, those are not easy questions, Steve, but I'll give it a go. My biggest mistake. Well, you won't be surprised. I've made quite a few over my career, but I try to learn from them all. I think one of the biggest mistakes that certainly comes to mind was, it was early on in my career. I think it's my second year as a sales manager. I'd been given a remit to manage, I guess, a new technology for me. So something I didn't know anything about. And I had a headcount, and I had a budget for that headcount, and I had a target that was ticking like a time bomb, and certainly never goes away. So I was desperate to fill the role, and I interviewed 3 candidates, none of which were strong candidates. But I felt the pressure that I had to do something. So I made a knee-jerk reaction and hired one of the candidates. And in all honesty, I knew even before I made the offer that the candidate wasn't quite right. But I thought, do you know what? Probably better to have somebody covering a patch rather than nothing. Actually, what happened and what transpired is it was a terrible mistake, because that individual was, as I suspected, not right for the role, not right for the company, didn't deliver any results. But even worse, I then had to go through my first experience of exiting somebody from the business. So I guess there was a silver lining, that I learned something, but it was bad for the individual, bad for the company, bad for me, and actually wasted 6 months of lost opportunity. So I think the lesson was, trust your instinct. And it's better to find the right person than just to put warm bodies, because sales is not the kind of role where it's mechanical. Just having a person in role is better than no one. Actually, the wrong person is worse than no one.
I totally empathise with that. But hey, it is really difficult as a new manager. So you've got the pressure, target is ticking away every month.
Absolutely.
And probably you've got your talent people saying, well, this is the best of the bunch.
Yes.
So, it's really difficult.
Okay.
That's a really good lesson. And finally, your biggest triumph, what are you most proud of?
Okay. So I guess biggest triumph or biggest success. I've also been fortunate that there's been quite a few of those throughout my career. And I think that the reality is that those successes have come really from me being part of a team, not specifically that I did. But one that comes to mind, it may not be the greatest success, but one that comes to mind is early on in my career, I had some junior people working for me. I was relatively junior as a leader as well. And I came under enormous pressure from people, up the management tree, to take an individual off an opportunity, not because they had done something wrong. In fact, it was them that had opened and found the opportunity and taken it so far. But, people who were not close to the deal or the opportunity or the individual felt, oh, this is really big now. We need to take such and such off that account and put somebody else on. And I felt that that was morally incorrect, because I think you need to have moral standards, and I think your people need to believe in your moral standards that are consistent. And B, I felt I was closer to the customer and closer to what was happening. So my knowledge as the first line manager was that the individual I had in place was the right individual to take that through. Long story short, we won the opportunity, and the individual, it was the biggest deal of their career, and it was great for everyone involved. But it would have been very easy to crumble, because I was put under a lot of pressure by people, multiple layers in the organization above me, to kind of fold to their point of view. So I was very pleased that I didn't do that, and I think there's a lot of lessons that I've taken through with me throughout my career from that one.
Yes, that's fantastic. And for me, what ties the two together is kind of the strength of character, the conviction. Having conviction morals and integrity is important.
It's critical, yeah.
Yeah, and you come under pressure, but you have to be strong as a sales manager. Stephen, once again, thank you ever so much.
Absolute pleasure, Steve. Thank you so much.
That was great. If you are an aspiring or new sales manager in complex business to business, or you know of somebody who is, you may want to go to www.realsalesmanager.com. That's realsalesmanager, all one word.com, to learn about our unique blend of training and coaching to help become as effective as possible, as quickly as possible.